It was supposed to be the most magical night of her life. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis shimmered like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden glow, their light dancing across the marble floor. The scent of fresh roses hung in the air, mingling with the fizz of champagne and the soft murmur of polite conversation. Waiters in white gloves moved gracefully through the crowd, offering flutes of sparkling wine to elegantly dressed guests. Everything was perfect, just the way Sophia had always imagined it. She stood near the center of it all, a vision in a pale blue lace dress, her eyes bright with hope. Her heart beat a little faster each time someone smiled at her, knowing that tonight was the night, her night. The night she and Daniel would finally announce their engagement to the world. She glanced around, searching the room for him. He was late, yes, but Daniel was always busy. A man like him, sharp, driven, important, had a lot on his plate. But he always came through. Always. Or so she thought. She adjusted the delicate neckline of her dress and smiled faintly as she caught sight of her parents deep in conversation with a group of influential guests. They had orchestrated this match, carefully aligning her future with Daniel's for the sake of legacy and power. They were proud tonight, proud of her, proud of what this union represented. But then, in an instant, everything changed. The double doors to the ballroom swung open with a sudden gust of air that seemed to silence the entire room. Heads turned, glasses paused mid-sip, conversations froze in mid-sentence. And there, in the doorway, stood Daniel. He wasn't alone. His hand was intertwined with another woman's, a woman in a blood-red gown that clung to her like silk to skin. Her lips curled in a smirk as cameras clicked and gasps rippled through the room like a storm rolling in. Lisa Carter, daughter of one of Daniel's most powerful business allies. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't move. Couldn't. It felt as if her feet had been cemented to the ballroom floor. Her glass trembled in her hand as Daniel walked straight toward her, never letting go of Lisa's hand. And then he stopped, right in front of her. Eyes cold, voice flat. "I can't marry you." The words hit her like a slap. Murmurs erupted all around them, some stunned, others gleefully scandalized. The sting of humiliation crept up her neck, but still she stood frozen, confused, heartbreaking wide open. "What were you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's expression didn't change. "Let's not pretend, Sophia. You have nothing to offer me." Tears stung her eyes. "But you proposed to me." He let out a short, cruel laugh. "Did I? Or was that just a conversation between our families?" The room grew heavier with every word. Her mind scrambled to make sense of it, but nothing did. "I needed your name, your family's influence," he continued. "But now, I have better options." Lisa's smirk deepened. "He means me," she said sweetly, as if she were doing Sophia a favor by clarifying. Sophia's world tilted. Her heart pounded in her ears. "This is a joke, right?" Daniel didn't blink. "I never loved you, Sophia. You were a stepping stone, nothing more." Somewhere in the crowd, a glass shattered. Her hands began to shake. Her gaze flicked to her parents, hoping for comfort, for strength. But when her mother finally stepped forward, her face wasn't filled with concern. It was rage. "You've humiliated us," her mother spat, low and vicious. "Do you understand what you've done?" I didn't," Sophia tried to speak, but the words failed her. "If you can't secure a husband with wealth and power," her mother hissed, "then you are no longer a daughter of mine." And just like that, her mother turned her back on her. In that moment, surrounded by luxury, cameras, and whispers, Sophia wasn't a bride-to-be or a cherished daughter. She was no one. The sparkle of the chandeliers above no longer looked like stars. They looked like sharp, cold glass. And beneath them, Sophia stood alone. That night, she lost more than just a fiancé. She lost her identity, her family, her place in the world. But what she didn't know was that this night, the one that shattered everything, was the beginning of a story far greater than the one she had planned. From the glittering ballroom to the grimy streets of Manhattan, Sophia's world had unraveled in a matter of hours. She walked alone through the city, the biting night air cutting through her like knives. Her once elegant heels were now slung over her shoulder, her bare feet aching with every step on the unforgiving pavement. The pale blue lace dress that had once dazzled under chandeliers now clung to her like a memory she was desperate to forget. Each passing taxi and gust of wind reminded her she no longer belonged to the world she had known just hours ago. Her diamond ring was gone, left behind on the ballroom floor like discarded evidence of a life she no longer had. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she didn't check it. She already knew. No one was calling to comfort her. No one was coming to find her. Not her parents. Not her so-called friends. Not Daniel. The city's noise faded into the background as her mind replayed the night. Daniel's cold voice, her mother's cutting words, the humiliation that had swallowed her whole. She kept walking until the lights grew dimmer and the air grew heavier with the scent of liquor and rain-soaked asphalt. That's when she saw it. A bar. Quiet. Old. Out of place like her. It wasn't the kind of place she'd ever imagined herself walking into. It wasn't sleek or sophisticated. The windows were fogged up, the neon sign flickering with exhaustion. But in that moment, it was refuge. A place where no one knew her name. She pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling in a tired chime. The air inside was warm and smelled of whiskey, wood, and stories no one wanted to remember. A few men sat hunched at the bar, shoulders heavy, eyes lost in their drinks. The bartender didn't ask questions when she sat down. He just raised an eyebrow when she muttered, "Whiskey. Neat." The burn in her throat felt right. At least that pain made sense. "You don't seem like the whiskey type," came a voice from a few stools down. She turned her head and saw him. He wasn't like the men she was used to. No suit, no cologne that cost more than rent. He wore a plain dark jacket, a gray t-shirt underneath. His hair was slightly tousled, like he hadn't bothered to style it. And yet, there was something about him. Something quiet, confident, dangerous, maybe, but not in the way Daniel had been. This man didn't care who she was. He wasn't impressed or curious. He was simply there. "Maybe I wasn't before," she muttered, swirling her glass. "But people change." He studied her for a second, then gave a small nod. "Rough night." She let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that." And then, without meaning to, she told him everything. The champagne, the betrayal, the red dress, the cold words, the mother who walked away. She didn't even know why she was telling a stranger all of this. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the fact that she had no one else. Or maybe it was because, in this dimly lit corner of the world, she didn't have to pretend. He listened without interrupting, just watching her with those unreadable eyes. And when she was done, when the words had finally spilled out of her like blood from a wound, he leaned forward, elbows on the bar, and said something that made her blink. "If you need a husband," he said casually, "I'm right here." She stared at him, stunned. "What?" "I'm serious," he said with a small shrug. "You clearly need a fresh start. I've got nothing better to do. Seems like a fair trade." Her lips parted, caught somewhere between disbelief and laughter. "You want to marry me?" she asked, voice laced with amusement and exhaustion. He gave a lazy smile. Why not? It was insane, completely ridiculous. And yet, something in her stirred. A tiny, reckless part of her, the part that had been shattered in that ballroom, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her, wanted to say yes. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the chaos still swirling in her chest. But for the first time that night, she felt like she was making the decision. Not her parents, not Daniel, her. She lifted her glass toward him with a shaky smile. "All right, stranger," she whispered, "let's get married." And just like that, in the haze of heartbreak and whiskey, Sophia rewrote her fate. Did you know? In moments of deep emotional distress, especially after a traumatic experience like public humiliation or rejection, the human brain seeks to regain a sense of control. That's why people sometimes make impulsive, life-altering choices, not out of recklessness, but out of survival. It's the mind's way of anchoring itself to something, anything that feels like a decision made on their own terms. For Sophia, saying yes to a stranger's wild proposal wasn't just about starting over. It was about reclaiming power in a life where she had lost everything. The morning light filtered in through thin, faded curtains, casting soft streaks across a small, unfamiliar room. Sophia stirred beneath a scratchy old blanket, her head pounding, her mouth dry. For a moment, her mind hovered in that foggy space between sleep and reality, and for one blissful second, she thought maybe, just maybe, it had all been a dream. Then she opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was stained with age. A ceiling fan creaked overhead, spinning lazily. She sat up slowly, her body heavy with confusion and something else. Dread. This wasn't her room. These weren't her sheets. And this definitely wasn't her life. She blinked, heart beginning to race, and looked down at her hand. There, catching a sliver of sunlight, was a cheap silver ring. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't a dream. She had married a stranger. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned her head and saw him. Liam, still asleep on the couch beside her, shirtless, one arm slung carelessly over his chest. He looked peaceful, like someone who hadn't just upended someone else's life in a whiskey-fueled blur. "What the hell did I do?" she whispered to herself, swinging her legs over the edge of the couch. Her bare feet met cold wooden floorboards that creaked beneath her, echoing her growing panic. The apartment around her was small, painfully small. The furniture looked secondhand, mismatched, and worn. There was no glittering marble, no polished silver tray with breakfast and fresh-cut roses. Just a cluttered little kitchen, a single wobbly table, and a lingering smell of old coffee and cheap aftershave. As if on cue, Liam stirred. He glanced over at her, gave a lazy grin, and said, "Morning, wifey." She stared at him wide-eyed. "Please tell me this was just a bad dream." He stretched with a yawn and stood up, completely unbothered. "Nope, it's real. You married a stranger. Congrats." Sophia let out a groan and buried her face in her hands. Unbelievable. Liam, still completely at ease, walked toward the tiny kitchenette and began cracking eggs into a pan. "I figured you'd need some food before the regret really kicks in." She didn't respond. What could she say? That she had made a mistake? That she never should have gone into that bar? That this wasn't the life she was meant to live? Because deep down, she already knew all of that. But none of it changed the fact that she was here now. And nothing about this new reality resembled the world she'd come from. The next few days were a crash course in the unfamiliar. Sophia quickly realized that there were no maids to clean up after her anymore. No assistants to run errands or stylists to pick out her clothes. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by a couple of basic outfits Liam had found at a discount shop. She had to do laundry, actual laundry. She had to learn how to cook without burning everything. And for the first time in her life, she had to think about money. Real money. Not trust funds or limitless credit cards. Not $12 organic water bottles or imported truffles. She now lived in a world where grocery lists had to be carefully planned, where Liam raised an eyebrow at every unnecessary purchase and muttered things like, "You're not a Davenport anymore, princess." At first, it was humiliating. Sophia found herself standing in a cramped grocery store aisle, holding a bottle of sparkling water she used to drink every day. $12. She looked at Liam, who simply plucked it from her hands and replaced it with a 99-cent alternative. "Welcome to the real world," he said, tossing it into the cart. She huffed, but didn't argue. It was frustrating, disorienting, and yet, something else was beginning to stir beneath the surface. For once, no one expected her to be perfect. There were no social obligations, no events to plan, no high society vultures waiting for her to stumble. She could be clumsy, she could mess up, she could just be. And then there was Liam. He wasn't polished. He didn't shower her with expensive gifts or call her darling in front of crowds. But he showed up. When she accidentally burned dinner, he didn't scold her. He just laughed and ordered pizza. When she tripped over a loose floorboard, he caught her before she could fall. When the power went out during a thunderstorm and she curled up in the dark, fighting back tears she couldn't explain, he didn't ask questions. He just wrapped her in a blanket and sat beside her. He didn't judge. He didn't pity. And for the first time in a long time, someone was simply there. She had woken up in a stranger's apartment. But with every dish she washed, every meal she learned to cook, and every small moment of laughter with Liam, she felt a little less like a stranger to herself. Sophia Davenport had been raised to believe that status, wealth, and control were everything. But maybe, just maybe, losing all of that was the only way she could ever learn what living truly meant. Sophia had never expected a laugh again. Not really. Not the kind of laugh that starts in your chest and escapes before you can stop it. The kind that feels like light cracking through the cracks of something broken. Not after what happened at the St. Regis. Not after her entire world collapsed in front of 100 watchful eyes and the only people who were supposed to stand beside her turned their backs. And yet, there it was, one quiet evening, tucked inside a run-down apartment that smelled faintly of toast and old books. Sophia laughed. And it was because of Liam. It had started raining that afternoon. One of those heavy, relentless rains that washed over the city like a warning. By sunset, the power was out. No TV, no lights, no noise except the soft tapping of raindrops against the window panes and the occasional groan of thunder. The darkness wrapped around them like a blanket of silence, and Sophia found herself curled up on the couch, knees to her chest, staring out at the storm with a tightness in her throat she couldn't name. In her old life, storms meant fireplaces, candles from luxury boutiques, warm throws made from imported cashmere, and housekeepers fussing over backup generators. Now, they meant Liam lighting matches in the dark and rummaging through drawers for flashlights that may or may not work. But then he did something unexpected. He returned from the kitchen with a handful of mismatched candles, some so old they barely stood upright, and arranged them clumsily on the coffee table. The flickering light cast golden shadows across his face as he flopped down beside her, a blanket in one hand and 2 mugs of cocoa in the other. Candlelight, cocoa, and a blackout, he said, handing her a cup. Romantic, right? Or just terrifyingly budget-friendly? She smirked, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Depends. Are we pretending this is intentional? Always, he said, settling in beside her. Confidence is everything. She didn't answer right away. The silence grew again, comfortable this time, until the quiet was broken by a sudden, loud crack of thunder. Sophia jumped, her mug sloshing dangerously. Liam didn't tease her. He just reached over, took the cup from her hands, and replaced it with a blanket instead. Then he draped his arm behind her on the couch, not possessively, not protectively, just there, present. That was the thing about Liam. He was always just there. When she stumbled across a loose floorboard one afternoon and nearly crashed into the wall, he caught her effortlessly, not with panic, but with a low laugh and a gentle, "You really do have a talent for chaos." When she burned the rice and nearly set off the smoke alarm, he didn't complain. He simply opened a window and said, "Guess it's pizza night again." When she broke down crying over a simple, ridiculous task like folding a fitted sheet, he didn't tell her to calm down or remind her how far she'd fallen. He just sat on the floor beside her and said, "Well, at least we've both failed that one." And she had laughed, actually laughed. Somehow, without even trying, Liam was helping her find pieces of herself she hadn't known were still there. Not the version of Sophia who posed for magazines and spoke at charity galas. Not the girl who memorized designer names and smiled on cue. But the real one. The one who liked hot cocoa in the rain. Who found comfort in quiet. Who had never folded a sheet properly in her life. For so long, Sophia's world had revolved around image. What to wear. Who to be seen with. What to say. And, more importantly, what not to say. Every move had been judged. Every mistake amplified. But now, for the first time in forever, she could breathe. No more whispers behind her back. No more forced smiles. No more pretending. She could wear sweatpants all day. She could mess up dinner. She could go to sleep with mascara still on her face and know that no one cared. Liam certainly didn't. He teased her, yes, but there was never malice behind it. Only amusement. Only warmth. And it was in that simplicity, in that raw, imperfect day-to-day, that she felt herself begin to heal. She still missed pieces of her old life. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. There were days she craved the comfort of silk sheets or the ease of private drivers. But more and more, she realized that luxury had come with a price: her freedom, her voice, her identity. Now, as Liam made bad jokes by candlelight and offered her burnt toast for breakfast with a proud grin, she didn't feel like a lost socialite clinging to survival. She felt human, grounded, alive, and somehow, Liam had become the man who brought her back to life. Not with grand gestures or declarations, but with quiet, steady kindness. He didn't save her from the storm. He just sat beside her in it, cocoa in hand, offering her the one thing she never knew she needed: peace. It started with the wine. One quiet evening, after a long day of errands and grocery budgeting, Liam came home with a bottle of red tucked under his arm. Sophia barely looked up from where she was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, flipping through a worn paperback novel. It was nothing fancy, just a grocery store brand, the kind of wine you'd pick up on a whim. Still, he poured 2 glasses and handed one to her. "Let me guess," she said playfully, raising an eyebrow. "You more of a beer guy?" Liam didn't answer. He simply swirled the wine gently in his glass, lifted it to the light, inhaled slowly with closed eyes, then took a small, thoughtful sip. Sophia blinked. That wasn't just sipping. That was technique. "What was that?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. He shrugged, just enjoying the wine. "No," she said, sitting up straighter. "That was a sommelier move. Swirling, smelling, checking the color." "Who are you?" Liam smirked. "Maybe I just like wine." But Sophia couldn't shake the thought. Regular guys didn't drink wine like that. Not the ones who wore scuffed boots and paid attention to gas prices. Not the ones who lived in apartments with flickering lights and chipped countertops. Then came a car incident. They were walking past a luxury dealership on a Saturday afternoon. Sophia paused in front of a shiny Aston Martin on display behind a glass. Just for fun, she asked, "If you could have any car in the world, what would it be?" Liam didn't even think. Aston Martin DBS Superleggera. V12 engine, 715 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. Top speed, 211 miles per hour. She turned to him slowly. "You just had that memorized?" He shrugged again. "What? I like cars." But Sophia knew car guys. They didn't live in one-bedroom apartments with sinks that groaned every time you turned the faucet. They didn't own 2 pairs of shoes and cut coupons. And they definitely didn't casually name luxury vehicles like a seasoned collector. She let it go, for now. But the questions didn't stop circling in her mind. The final straw came when she was looking for a pen. Liam had stepped into the shower, and Sophia, needing to jot down a grocery list, opened the drawer of the small table they kept by the kitchen. And there it was, a thick stack of $100 bills. Her heart skipped a beat. She touched the edges of the bills, running her fingers over the crisp, uncreased paper. This wasn't forgotten lunch money or a few emergency 20s tucked away. This was thousands, neatly stacked, hidden but not too well. Her mind reeled. How? Why? She was still holding the stack when Liam appeared in the doorway, a towel around his neck, his hair damp. "Looking for something?" he asked casually. She jumped, startled, and turned to him with wide eyes. "Where did this come from?" He walked over, took the stack gently from her hands, and placed it back in the drawer before closing it without a word. "Liam," she pressed. "Seriously, where's that money from?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, expression unreadable. Then, with that familiar half-smile, he said, "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "It matters." He exhaled through his nose, not angrily, but like someone who had expected this moment. "You said you didn't care about money, that it wasn't why you married me." "And I meant it," she replied. "But this," she gestured toward the drawer, "this doesn't add up. We live like we can barely pay rent. We eat instant noodles and bargain cereal. But you've got thousands of dollars hidden in a drawer? You don't flinch at budgeting, but you know the top speed of a Superleggera? And you taste wine like you've been trained to do it." He studied her for a long moment. "You think I'm lying about who I am?" he asked, voice quieter now. She hesitated. "I don't know what to think. I just know something isn't right." Liam didn't deny it. He didn't laugh it off or crack a joke like he usually did. He just stepped closer and said, "You marry me thinking I was nobody, and that was okay with you. But the second you saw a glimpse of something else, you got scared. Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because he wasn't wrong. She had been okay with the idea of simple, ordinary, poor. She had needed that escape. She had craved the freedom it brought. But now that the truth was bleeding through the cracks, she realized she didn't know who Liam really was. And that scared her more than anything. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning. Was he a criminal? Was he hiding from something? Was he a man with secrets? Or someone running for a past too heavy to carry? Liam had always been kind, always present, always there when she needed him. But now, she wasn't sure if he was a mystery to be unraveled, or a truth she wasn't ready to face. The truth didn't come crashing down. It unraveled slowly, quietly, like a thread pulled from the edge of a tapestry, until everything Sophia thought she knew came apart. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Liam was out running errands, and Sophia had taken to tidying up the apartment, more out of habit than purpose, while reorganizing a dusty stack of old books tucked behind the couch. One of them slipped from her hands and fell open on the floor. And there it was. Tucked between the pages, yellowed with time and folded in half, was a newspaper clipping. She almost ignored it. Just some old scrap paper, probably used as a bookmark. But something about it caught her eye. The bold headline, the black and white photo beneath it. Her blood ran cold, because staring back at her from the grainy page was Liam. Only the name below the picture wasn't Liam Carter, or Liam Smith, or any of the generic surnames he occasionally tossed around when they were joking. It was Liam Alexander Sterling. The headline read, "Billionaire heir disappears after family scandal. Sterling legacy in question." Sophia sank onto the couch, heart pounding. Her eyes scanned every line of the article. The Sterling family, real estate tycoons, tech investments, luxury brands, power, influence, and a scandal that shook the upper crust of Manhattan 3 years ago. And right at the center of it all, Liam, the elusive heir who had vanished without a trace. She didn't move for a long time. The clipping lay in her lap, her fingers trembling around the edges. All the pieces she'd been trying to fit together, the wine, the cars, the money, the ease with which he carried himself even in the smallest, most uncomfortable spaces, it all clicked into place. He wasn't just a mystery. He was a man who had once owned the world and walked away from it. When Liam finally returned, the door opened with the same soft creak as always. He stepped inside, keys jingling in his hand, and called out casually, "I picked up that bread you." He stopped mid-sentence. Sophia was standing in the center of the room, the newspaper clipping in her hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it out to him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was thick, suffocating. Liam looked at the paper, then slowly met her eyes. There was no panic in his expression, no excuses, just a quiet resignation, like a man who had known this moment was inevitable. "So it's true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's your real name. You're Liam Alexander Sterling." He sighed and set the grocery bag on the table. "Where did you find that?" "That's not the question," she snapped, stepping closer. Her hands were shaking now, her heart pounding against her ribs. "The question is why? Why didn't you tell me? Why lie to me about who you are?" Liam ran a hand through his hair, his face unreadable for a beat. Then he looked at her, not with the playful smirk she was used to, but with something raw, honest. "Because I didn't want you to love me for that," he said quietly. "For the money, the name, the legacy." Sophia stared at him. "You thought I would?" He gave a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You come from that world, Sophia. You know how it works. People fall in love with what someone has, not who they are." Her throat tightened. "So what? You vanished from your life and started playing poor just to test people?" "No," he said quickly, stepping forward. "I left because I needed to know if anyone could see me without all of it. Not Liam Sterling, the billionaire. Just Liam, the man." She felt dizzy. Everything felt like a lie. "I married you," she whispered, "thinking you were just some guy with a good heart and no money. And I fell for you," he said, voice quiet but steady, "because you looked at me and saw a human being, not a number in a bank account, not a piece of some legacy. Just me. Sophia swallowed hard. But you still lied. I know, he admitted. And I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you without changing everything between us. I didn't want to lose what we had. She looked away, trying to breathe through the confusion curling in her chest. She didn't know what hurt more, the lie or the fact that everything about it made a twisted kind of sense. I thought we were building something real, she whispered. We are, he said, stepping closer. His voice dropped, softer now. But now that you know the truth, I have to ask you something. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Do you still love me? He asked. He didn't reach for her. He didn't beg. He just stood there, his heart in his eyes, waiting. Sophia felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She had fallen for a man who made her laugh when the world felt dark, who brought her cocoa during blackouts, who never once made her feel like she had to earn his affection. That man hadn't changed. He was still standing in front of her. But now, the truth stood between them like a wall she didn't know how to climb. And yet, behind all the lies and secrecy, she knew. She knew what her heart wanted. And for the first time since that fateful night in the ballroom, Sophia wasn't afraid to choose for herself. The city skyline stretched endlessly beneath a sky of fading gold, the first stars just beginning to flicker into view. Sophia stepped onto the rooftop and stopped in her tracks. She had no words. Strings of fairy lights were strung above her like soft constellations, twinkling gently in the twilight. Jazz music drifted through the air, smooth, nostalgic, impossibly romantic. A small, elegant table had been set at the edge of the rooftop, dressed in white linen and surrounded by flickering candles. The scent of fresh roses mingled with a warm evening breeze, wrapping around her like an embrace. She turned slowly, her eyes wide. You did all this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Liam was standing a few steps behind her, hands tucked into his pockets, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. I had some help, he said with a shrug, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. Sophia let out a breathless laugh. You know, she said, walking toward the table, most normal guys don't have access to rooftop venues and private chefs. Guilty as charged, he replied, pulling out a chair for her. Dinner was a dream. Each course arrived like something out of a five-star restaurant, delicate, delicious, and thoughtfully prepared. Liam poured the wine himself, expertly swirling it in the glass before handing it to her with a wink. And yet, even surrounded by luxury, Sophia felt none of the cold, performative weight she used to carry in her old life. With Liam, it wasn't about showing off. It was about showing up. Still, she couldn't ignore the flutter of nerves in her chest. Everything felt too perfect, too carefully arranged. He was up to something. As she set down her fork after dessert, Liam reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. You're quiet, he said softly, watching her closely. I guess I'm still processing everything, she admitted. Not just who you are, but what that means for us. He nodded, his expression gentle. Because of the money? She hesitated. It's not that I care about the wealth, Liam. I don't. It's just your world, the one you walked away from. It's so far from mine. What if I don't fit in? Liam leaned forward, eyes never leaving hers. You don't need to fit into my world, he said. I've already chosen yours. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Liam stood from the table. And then, without a word, he dropped to one knee. Sophia froze. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and slowly opened it. Inside was a ring unlike the one from the St. Regis. This one sparkled under the fairy lights, beautiful yet timeless, elegant without screaming wealth. It wasn't about extravagance, it was about meaning. Sophia, he said, his voice low but steady, full of emotion. When we got married that night, it was chaos. It was impulsive. It wasn't supposed to be real. He paused, then looked up at her with a softness that made her chest tighten. But every moment since then has been. You've seen me in my worst, and you still stayed. You didn't love the name or the fortune. You love me, and I've never known anything more real. Sophia's eyes blurred with tears. I don't want to just be the man you married on a whim, Liam said. I want to be the man you choose. The man who walked beside you, not because of chance, but because you want him there. He held out the ring. Will you marry me again? For real this time? Sophia didn't hesitate. A tear slid down her cheek as she smiled, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes. Liam's face lit up, and in one smooth motion, he slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. She melted into his embrace, burying her face in his shoulder, laughing through tears. This wasn't about fairy tales. It wasn't about ballrooms or bloodlines or status. This was about a man who walked away from everything the world said he should be to become someone worth choosing. And this time, Sophia wasn't choosing safety or legacy or power. She was choosing love. She was choosing Liam. The ballroom was glowing again, but this time, not with shallow opulence or the stiff air of old money. Instead, the golden light spilling from the chandeliers seemed warmer, richer, full of something far more meaningful. Laughter rippled through the crowd, glasses clinked softly, and everywhere you looked, there were stories. Women smiling, standing tall, reclaiming pieces of themselves. This was Sophia's night. The Sterling Foundation's inaugural gala was in full swing. Created to support women who had been abandoned, humiliated, or left to rebuild alone, the foundation had quickly gained attention, not just for its mission, but for the woman behind it. A woman who knew exactly what it felt like to lose everything and find her way back. Sophia moved through the crowd in a gown that shimmered subtly with every step. It wasn't about impressing anymore. It was about presence, power, purpose. Liam walked beside her, hand resting gently at the small of her back, grounding her. She no longer needed validation. She had built something real, alongside the man who had stood by her when no one else did. Then a voice pierced the hum of the room. Familiar, cold, mocking. Well, isn't this a surprise? Sophia turned slowly. There they were, Daniel and Lisa. Only, they weren't quite them anymore. Daniel's once impeccable suit looked worn at the cuffs, the fabric slightly faded. His posture, once arrogant and commanding, had slumped into something uncertain. Beside him, Lisa clung to his arm, her red lips still painted, but her eyes lacked their usual sharpness. Her dress, while still designer, no longer screamed wealth, it whispered desperation. For a heartbeat, the past stood in front of her. The betrayal, the ballroom, the smirk, the red gown. And yet, all of it felt small now. Sophia didn't flinch. Daniel gave a hollow smile. You've certainly moved up in the world. Lisa sneered faintly. Enjoy it while it lasts. Sophia's lips curved into something graceful. Not smug, not bitter, just steady. I heard about your father's company, she said, voice smooth. Tough luck. Liam stood silently beside her, his presence calm but firm. There was no need for words. His silence said more than anything. We won. Daniel's jaw tightened. Business is unpredictable, he said flatly, though his eyes betrayed the sting. Lisa tried to recover. Still, it must be strange, going from nothing to this. Sophia tilted her head slightly. Not really. See, I learned something important when I had nothing. I learned who I was. She looked at Daniel fully now, her voice quiet but resonant. You know, she said, I think I should actually thank you. He blinked. For what? For leaving me that night. There was no venom in her tone, just truth. Because if you hadn't, she continued, turning to glance at Liam with a soft smile, I never would have found the best decision of my life. She reached for Liam's hand, lacing her fingers with his. Him. Lisa's smirk vanished. Daniel's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Sophia didn't wait for a response. She gave them a final, graceful nod, then turned away, walking back into the light, into laughter, into purpose. Behind her, the ghosts of who she once was, what they once meant, faded into the crowd. This was her full circle. Not revenge, not spite, just closure. Karma hadn't come in the form of shouting or spectacle. It came dressed in elegance, wrapped in kindness, delivered with grace. And that was her real triumph. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long golden streaks across the shoreline as waves lapped gently at the sand. The air smelled of salt and sunshine, and the laughter of children rang out like music carried by the breeze. Sophia sat beneath a large sun umbrella, her toes buried in the warm sand, watching two small figures race toward the water. Leo and Lionel, her twins. Their laughter echoed over the beach as Liam chased after them, pretending to be a sea monster. Leo shrieked with delight, Lionel squealed, and Liam, barefoot and carefree, scooped them both up in his arms, spinning in a wide circle before falling back into the sand in a pile of joy and giggles. Sophia smiled, her heart full. There had been a time when she never thought this life would be hers. Not the love, not the family, not this quiet, beautiful kind of peace. She glanced down at the wedding band on her finger, simple and worn from time, but precious beyond anything she'd ever owned. Her gaze shifted back to the beach where Liam was now helping Lionel build a sandcastle. Leo clumsily gathering water with a too small bucket, spilling half of it along the way. Liam laughed, guiding their tiny hands, patient and proud. Sophia had lived through storms, public disgrace, heartbreak, betrayal, abandonment. She had once walked the streets of Manhattan in a ball gown, lost and humiliated, stripped of every label that had once defined her. Davenport, debutante, darling of high society, all gone. But sitting here now, surrounded by laughter and love, she knew she hadn't lost herself. She found herself, because in losing everything, she had finally been free to build something real. Not a life of appearances and approval, but one of purpose, one of meaning. And Liam, he had been there from the moment everything fell apart. Not to rescue her, not to fix her, but to stand beside her while she figured out how to stand on her own again. He was the man who taught her that true wealth wasn't measured in accounts or inheritances. It was in connection, in kindness, in showing up when it mattered most. A soft giggle pulled her from her thoughts as Lionel came running up, proudly holding a lopsided seashell in both hands. "Look, Mommy," she beamed. "It's for you." Sophia took it gently, holding it like treasure. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Just like you." Behind her, Liam approached, brushing sand from his arms, his hair wild from the wind and the play. He bent down, pressing a kiss to Sophia's forehead before sitting beside her, pulling her close. "Happy?" he asked quietly. Sophia leaned into him, their children playing just steps away, the waves a soft lullaby in the background. "More than I ever thought possible," she said. She looked out at the horizon, eyes shining. Not with tears this time, but with peace. This was her full circle moment. Once she had stood in a ballroom, waiting for a life that was never meant to be. Now, she sat in the sand, holding everything she had ever truly needed. Love, family, a future. And as the sun dipped lower, casting its final golden light over the ocean, Sophia whispered to herself, a quiet truth that would forever anchor her soul. "You were the best decision I ever made." Sometimes, life has a way of breaking us open in the most painful places, only to rebuild us into someone stronger, wiser, and more whole than we ever imagined. Sophia thought she had it all figured out. She was engaged to a man who looked perfect on paper, surrounded by a world that praised status and power more than truth and heart. But in one devastating moment, all of it was ripped away. She lost her future, her family, her identity, or so she thought. But what she discovered was this: when you lose everything, you're finally free to find what truly matters. In a rundown apartment, with mismatched furniture and secondhand mugs, she found laughter again. In burnt toast and candlelit blackouts, she found companionship. In the eyes of a man who didn't ask her to be perfect, she found love that had nothing to do with money or legacy, and everything to do with presence, honesty, and choice. And when she looked back on the betrayal, the heartbreak, the night that shattered her world, she no longer saw a ruin. She saw the beginning of everything beautiful. Sophia's story isn't just about romance. It's about redemption, about learning that what seems like the worst day of your life might be the first step towards something extraordinary. So if you've ever felt broken, if you've ever been left behind, overlooked, or underestimated, remember this. Sometimes, the greatest losses lead us straight to the love, the life, and the future we were always meant to have. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For more tales of love, hope, and second chances, we'll see you in the next one.